An elderly woman asks for warm water for her weary dog, but the shopkeeper chases them out into the snow. A grieving Navy SEAL witnesses this and offers them shelter in his secluded mountain cabin. But the old German shepherd carries a memory that points to something far more disturbing. A winter charity has marked dozens of isolated residents as safe, though no one has been able to reach their doorsteps. With an ice storm approaching, the SEAL has only hours to help Ashford find 43 forgotten names. What began with refusing a bowl of water will soon change how an entire town cares for one another. Where are you watching from? Join us for the full story, and please like, share, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. By noon, the morning snow had stopped, and Ashford looked almost peaceful. Sunlight flashed across the frozen river and rested on the white roofs along Main Street. Plows had cleared 2 narrow lanes through town, leaving hard ridges of snow along the sidewalks. Beyond the church steeple, darker clouds were gathering over the Green Mountains, but for the moment, the sky above the North Fork Diner remained pale and bright. Rosalind Harrow stood in the diner's narrow entrance with one hand pressed against the glass door behind her. On the other side, beneath the awning, Harbor waited in the cold. The German shepherd's black and gold coat was damp along his belly. Snow clung between his toes, and silver showed around his muzzle. His right ear stood tall, while the tip of the left folded slightly forward. He had followed Rosalind nearly 3 miles from the disabled car without complaint, but now his hind legs trembled whenever he shifted his weight. Rosalind could feel her own heart beating too quickly beneath Thomas's old field coat. She looked toward the counter. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "My car broke down west of the bridge. I've already called for a tow, but there's no signal where we stopped." Dale Pritchard glanced past her at Harbor. The owner of the diner was a broad man in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair, a heavy mustache, and a kitchen towel over one shoulder. He had been sorting receipts beside the register when Rosalind entered. He had not asked whether she was hurt. "We can't have dogs in here," he said. "He isn't in the dining room. He's blocking the entrance." Harbor was standing beside the wall, leaving most of the doorway clear. Rosalind removed one wet glove. Her fingers had stiffened during the walk. "I only need some water for him, not cold. Just a little warm, if you could. And perhaps a towel you no longer use." Dale looked at her boots, then at the faded coat hanging loosely from her shoulders. "You planning to buy anything?" Rosalind paused. She had money in the inner pocket of her coat, along with a bank card and identification that would have changed Dale's manner in an instant. The thought of producing them made something inside her tighten. "I will pay for the water," she said. A few customers had begun watching from their booths. Behind the counter, Mona Ellis reached for a white enamel bowl with a blue rim. She filled it halfway, then added a little warm water from the tap. Dale turned his head. "Mona." That was all he said. Mona stopped. Her hair was tied in a loose knot at the back of her neck, and a scratched metal name tag rested above the pocket of her brown-red apron. Near the register, a folded pharmacy receipt protruded from her purse. The name printed across the top was June Ellis. Mona looked toward Harbor. The old dog had lowered his head. A faint shiver passed through his shoulders. "Dale, it's just water. And then it's food. Then they're sitting by the door all afternoon." Dale lowered his voice, though not enough to keep Rosalind from hearing. "We had complaints last month. Insurance has rules. I'm not losing this place because somebody decides the diner is a warming shelter." Rosalind's face grew hot despite the cold trapped in her clothes. She had spent most of her adult life in rooms where men listened when she spoke. She had negotiated contracts, addressed boards, and stood before hundreds of employees without notes. Yet standing there in wet boots, asking for water for an old dog, she found herself searching for a sentence that would not sound like pleading. "Please," she said. "He's tired." Dale's expression did not change. Mona's fingers tightened around the bowl. Then she set it beneath the counter. The small scrape of enamel against wood carried through the diner. Rosalind looked at Mona. The woman's eyes dropped at once. "All right," Rosalind said. She put her glove back on and opened the outer door. A gust swept powdered snow across the threshold. Harbor lifted his head and tried to step toward her. His right hind leg slipped. Rosalind caught the leather collar before he went down. "Easy," she whispered. Harbor leaned against her leg. He was heavier than she remembered, or perhaps she was more tired than she had allowed herself to admit. Dale came into the entrance behind her. "You need to move away from the door." Rosalind turned slowly. "Give me 1 minute. I've got customers coming in. There is no one in the parking lot." "Ma'am." Harbor stepped between them. The movement was not fast. There was no snarl, no raised fur. The dog simply placed his aging body in front of Rosalind and looked at Dale. His legs were still shaking. Across the lot, Jonah Kincaid sat behind the wheel of his pickup with one hand on the door handle. He had seen the woman when he pulled in. He had seen the dog outside and the man speaking to her from the doorway. For several seconds, Jonah told himself there was probably more to the situation than he understood. He had come down from the mountain for coffee, lamp oil, and a new fuse for the generator. That was the whole trip. He had no interest in diner arguments, stranded travelers, or whatever else waited beyond the glass. Then the dog slipped. Jonah looked toward the road. He could leave. Someone else would help. Inside the diner, several people had a clear view of the entrance. None of them moved. Jonah shut off the engine. He crossed the parking lot in a dark green field jacket, old camouflage trousers, and worn brown boots. At 53, he still had the broad frame of the man he had once been, but the years had settled visibly across his face. Gray ran through his short brown hair and the stubble along his jaw. His nose bent slightly to the left from an old break. He stopped a few feet from Rosalind. "Is the dog hurt?" "I don't think so." Rosalind kept one hand on Harbor's collar. "He's cold and exhausted." "How far did he walk?" "Almost 3 miles. Jonah glanced at her. "And you?" "The same distance." Dale opened the door wider. "She needs to move along." Jonah looked at him. "Did she ask to stay?" "She brought a dog onto the property. He's outside. I know how this starts." Jonah did not answer immediately. He looked through the glass and saw the bowl beneath the counter. For a moment, anger moved through him with an old, familiar ease. Years ago, he would have known exactly what to do with anger. Give it direction. Make it useful. Now it mostly left him tired. He stepped past Dale and entered the diner. "Coffee?" Mona asked, too quickly. "Later." Jonah placed cash on the counter. 2 soups to go. Plain eggs, if the kitchen has them. "No seasoning." Mona nodded. "And that bowl," he added. Dale followed him inside. "You don't know what you're encouraging." Jonah turned. He had planned to say nothing. Silence usually made life simpler. Then he saw Rosalind through the glass, kneeling beside Harbor even though the position clearly hurt her. One gloved hand rubbed the dog's chest, while the other steadied her against the wall. "She asked you for water, Dale. This is my business. Then run it however you can live with." Jonah's voice was low. He did not wait for a response. Mona brought the bowl out from beneath the counter. She added a little more warm water, testing it with her finger before handing it over. Her hand shook. Jonah carried the bowl outside and crouched beside Harbor. The dog watched him closely, but did not pull away. "Let him smell you first," Rosalind said. "I know." The words came out sharper than Jonah intended. Rosalind looked at him. Jonah exhaled. Sorry. Harbor sniffed the back of Jonah's hand. After a moment, he lowered his head toward the bowl. Jonah held it high enough that the dog did not have to bend far. Harbor drank slowly. Rosalind closed her eyes for one brief second. When she opened them, Mona was standing in the doorway with 2 towels and a paper bag. I should have brought it out, Mona said. Rosalind took one of the towels. Yes. Mona flinched, but Rosalind's voice was not cruel. I was afraid, Mona said. Rosalind wrapped the towel around Harbor's shoulders. Most people are, when it matters. She did not say anything more. Jonah studied the dog's rear leg as Harbor shifted. He needs to be checked. There was a veterinary clinic near the gas station, Rosalind said. I'll drive you. That isn't necessary. You planning to walk back? Rosalind looked toward the road, where the snowbanks glared beneath the sun. No. Jonah opened the rear door of his pickup and moved an old wool blanket from the floor. Harbor hesitated at the step. Jonah reached beneath the dog's chest, but Harbor stiffened. Don't lift him yet, Rosalind said. Let him decide. Jonah withdrew his hands. After a moment, Harbor placed his front paws inside. Jonah supported his hindquarters only when the dog looked back at him. It was not trust, exactly, but it was permission. The Ashford Veterinary Clinic occupied a converted farmhouse at the southern edge of town. A wooden sign swung above the porch, and muddy paw prints crossed the entry rug. Dr. Celeste Morgan was finishing with another patient when they arrived, so Jonah and Rosalind waited on a bench in the hallway. Harbor lay between them beneath the wool blanket. For several minutes, neither spoke. Rosalind held Thomas's old canvas delivery bag on her lap. A tarnished silver bell hung from one strap. You don't have to stay, she said at last. Jonah looked toward the closed examination room door. I know. You were only coming into town for coffee. How do you know that? You look like a man who resents having his schedule changed. The corner of his mouth moved, though not quite into a smile. Celeste opened the door and called them inside. She was a lean woman with short black curls threaded with silver and a pair of small leaf-shaped earrings. She crouched in front of Harbor before touching him. Well, she said softly, you've made some questionable decisions today. Harbor sniffed her sleeve. Celeste checked his paws, joints, and heartbeat. She pressed gently along his right hind leg, watching his face. He's cold and worn out. But I'm not finding an acute injury, she said. He needs warmth, food, water, and rest. No more long walks. Rosalind touched Harbor's neck. He wouldn't stop following me. That doesn't mean he should have been asked to continue. The words landed without accusation, which made them harder to dismiss. Rosalind looked down. I know. A radio played softly on a shelf near the medicine cabinet. The announcer was discussing the storm expected to reach Ashford within 36 hours. Ice accumulation could bring down trees and power lines. Residents were advised to check on older neighbors and anyone living alone. Celeste stepped into the next room to find a thermal coat in Harbor's size. The broadcast moved to local news. The Northlight Winter Foundation announced today that 98% of registered senior and isolated residents in the Ashford district have been contacted ahead of the storm. Harrow Route 7 was listed as fully confirmed shortly before noon. Harbor raised his head. Rosalind's hand stopped against his fur. The dog turned toward the canvas bag on the chair. He struggled upright, crossed the few feet between them, and pressed his nose against the silver bell. It rang once, a thin, familiar sound. Rosalind stared at it. Thomas had used that bell for years. 2 light rings at the end of a driveway, then Harbor's paw against the step. Some people on Route 7 would not open their doors for anyone else. Jonah watched Rosalind reach into the bag. She removed a folded sheet of paper. No letterhead. No signature. Only a few typed lines. Her eyes went to the final sentence. No one has come to Route 7. Outside the clinic window, the sunlight disappeared behind the first bank of storm clouds. By the time Celeste finished fitting Harbor with a dark green thermal coat, the sun had begun to fade behind the mountains. Rosalind stood near the clinic window, with the unsigned letter folded inside her hand. The final sentence remained visible between her fingers. No one has come to Route 7. She read it once more, then returned it to the canvas bag. Celeste tightened one strap beneath Harbor's chest and watched him take several slow steps across the examination room. That's enough, she said. He can walk from a vehicle to a front door. Nothing farther tonight. Harbor stopped beside Rosalind, as though the instruction had been intended for someone else. Celeste pointed at him. That look won't work on me. The dog lowered his head, but his amber eyes remained fixed on Rosalind. Jonah stood near the doorway, holding the paper bag from the diner. The soup inside had cooled, and one corner had gone dark, where broth had leaked through. Rosalind's phone rang before anyone spoke. The towing company had located her car, but the driver was helping clear a truck that had slid into a ditch north of town. Her vehicle would not reach the repair garage until morning. The dispatcher apologized twice and then ended the call to preserve the failing signal. Jonah looked at Celeste. Any hotels open? Not tonight. Celeste removed her stethoscope. The electric crews took the last rooms before noon. The church has cots, but they're still setting up the warming hall. I can stay there, Rosalind said. Celeste glanced at Harbor. You can. He can't. Rosalind rubbed the dog's neck beneath the new coat. Harbor leaned into her hand, shifting most of his weight away from his right hind leg. Jonah knew what came next before Celeste looked at him. No, he said. I haven't asked anything. You were going to. Celeste folded her arms. You have a warm house, a working generator, and no other animals. Jonah turned toward the window. Snow had begun drifting across the clinic parking lot again. Not a storm yet, just thin, dry lines moving over the pavement like smoke. Rosalind straightened. Mr. Kincaid has already done more than enough. That's true, Jonah said. Celeste gave him a long look. He had known her for 12 years. She had treated the shepherd mix Claire found near Route 12, the barn cat that lived beneath Jonah's porch, and once Jonah himself after he split his palm repairing a snowmobile and refused to go to urgent care. Celeste knew exactly how much silence he could hide behind. She turned to Rosalind. The church will be ready by morning. Jonah picked up the food bag. One night, he said. Rosalind hesitated. I can pay you. No. I wasn't offering charity. Neither am I. He opened the clinic door before she could answer. The road to Jonah's cabin climbed above Ashford, through stands of pine and bare maple. The truck's headlights moved across snowbanks stained blue by the evening shadows. Harbor lay across the back seat on the wool blanket, his head resting near the center console so he could keep Rosalind in sight. Rosalind watched the town lights fall away below them. You live far from everything, she said. That was the idea. Was. Jonah kept his eyes on the road. Road gets worse after the next turn. It wasn't an answer, and Rosalind did not press him. The cabin appeared 20 minutes later, set back among tall pines at the edge of a steep white slope. It was larger than Rosalind had expected, built from dark cedar logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Snow lay thick on the roof. A single amber lamp burned over the front door. Jonah parked beside a woodshed. He came around to help Harbor out, but this time he waited before reaching for him. Harbor placed his front paws on the running board, looked at Jonah, then allowed the man to support his hindquarters. Thank you, Rosalind said. Jonah nodded once. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar, cold ashes and coffee that had been left too long in a pot. The main room was clean, but still in the way an unused church could be clean. Nothing was out of place, because almost nothing had been touched. A stack of split wood rested beside the stone fireplace. 2 mugs hung beneath a shelf, though only one showed signs of recent use. Against the far wall stood a large radio desk, covered by a gray canvas cloth. Rosalind noticed it, but Jonah moved past without looking. He lit the fire first. Then he brought Harbor a shallow bowl of water and spread another blanket near the hearth. Harbor drank, walked once around the room, and stopped beside a chair near the window. It was a plain wooden chair with a blue cushion faded by years of sunlight. A pair of gray wool gloves rested across one arm. Jonah froze with a piece of firewood in his hands. Harbor sniffed the floor beside the chair. He did not touch the gloves. He lowered himself carefully onto the rug and rested his head between his paws. Rosalind looked from the dog to Jonah. "Was that your wife's chair?" Jonah placed the wood in the fire. "Yes." "I'm sorry." The answer did not come. Flames took hold along the edge of the log. Jonah adjusted the iron screen and stood. "Bathroom's down the hall. Guest room is the first door on the left. The latch sticks, so lift it before you turn." Rosalind removed Thomas's coat. "What was her name?" Jonah picked up the leaking paper bag. "Claire." Then he carried the soup into the kitchen. Dinner was quiet at first. Jonah reheated the soup in a saucepan and divided the plain eggs for Harbor. Rosalind sat at the small wooden table while the dog ate near her chair. The kitchen contained signs of 2 different lives. Jonah's green weatherproof notebook lay beside a jar of pencils. Above the sink hung a row of neatly labeled emergency fuses. But a ceramic bowl painted with small yellow flowers sat near the window, and a faded recipe card had been pinned to the wall. Rosalind read the handwriting without meaning to. "Add more cinnamon than he thinks is necessary." Jonah saw where she was looking. "She made apple bread. Did you complain about the cinnamon?" "Every time." "Was it too much?" "No." Something shifted in his face, there and gone. Rosalind lifted the spoon but did not drink. "My name may have sounded familiar on the radio." Jonah sat across from her. "It did. I helped start Northlight. I figured. You didn't say anything. You were asking for water. Didn't seem relevant. That stung more than accusation might have." Rosalind placed her spoon down. "Thomas and I established the foundation 24 years ago. At first, it was only 3 towns and 6 volunteers. By the time he died, we were operating across most of northern Vermont." Harbor stopped eating at the sound of Thomas's name. Rosalind glanced down. "Thomas believed winter exposed the truth about a community," she continued. "Not during the first snowfall. People help then. They shovel sidewalks and bring soup. He worried about the 3rd week, the 5th, when the roads stayed bad and everyone grew tired of being generous." Jonah tore a piece of bread but did not eat it. "The 13 routes around Ashford were his idea," Rosalind said. "Each one had a local coordinator, a physical check-in point, and someone whose name appeared beside every household. If a person didn't answer, a volunteer went to the door." "With Harbor?" "Sometimes." Rosalind looked toward the dog. Some residents trusted Thomas. Some trusted Harbor first. She explained the silver bell. Thomas had rung it at driveways, where people could not hear an engine from the house. Harbor had learned to tap twice at a porch step and bark once. Over time, the sound became familiar along the northern routes. After Thomas's death, the system began to change. Grant Barlow had joined Northlight years earlier as a financial strategist. He was intelligent, persuasive, and frighteningly good at making a difficult choice sound inevitable. Donations had leveled off, fuel costs had risen, volunteer numbers were falling. Grant proposed automated calls, digital confirmations, and an outside delivery contractor. The changes cut costs quickly. Northlight expanded into 4 additional counties. Rosalind had voted in favor. Jonah finally looked at her. "Did you visit any of the new routes?" "No. The old ones. Not after Thomas died." "Why?" The question was plain. That made it harder to answer. Rosalind folded her hands on the table. "Because every road reminded me of him." The fire cracked in the next room. Jonah's expression did not soften, but he stopped tearing the bread. Rosalind continued before she lost the nerve. The new reports came in each Monday. More calls completed. More households reached. Fewer dollars spent per delivery. I told myself Thomas would have wanted the foundation to survive. And did he? Want it to survive? Want it to become this? Rosalind looked toward the canvas bag near the door. I don't know. 6 weeks earlier, she had received the first unsigned letter at her home in Burlington. It contained no accusation of theft, no demand for money, and no name. Only descriptions. Food boxes left beside a closed gas station. An 81-year-old man unable to drive. Automated calls marked, answered when the line had disconnected. A volunteer instructed not to make home visits because the contract had already counted the route as complete. Rosalind had shown the letter to Elaine Wexler, her longtime attorney and friend. Elaine was 62, careful enough to read every word twice, and loyal enough never to protect Rosalind from the truth. They built a quiet inspection plan. Rosalind would visit several towns without announcing herself to local offices. Each evening, she would check in with Elaine and report where she intended to travel next. The purpose was not to trap employees or test the kindness of strangers. It was to see whether Northlight worked when nobody knew its founder was watching. "Did your attorney know you were driving alone?" Jonah asked. "Yes. Through rural Vermont, in January." She objected. "Smart woman?" I ignored her. "Not as smart." Rosalind almost smiled. Then Jonah leaned back. "You had people, staff, lawyers, a board. You could have ordered an audit. I requested preliminary records. The office sent me summaries." "And you believed them?" "I wanted to." The words settled between them. Jonah pushed his bowl away. "So you came here after the numbers stopped making you feel better." Rosalind's back stiffened. "That isn't fair." "No." He stood and carried his bowl to the sink. "But is it wrong?" Rosalind looked at the man's shoulders beneath the faded camouflage shirt. She had known men like Jonah in boardrooms, men who made a blunt judgment and called it honesty. But something in the cabin complicated that judgment. The radio desk remained covered. Claire's gloves remained on the chair. A second mug still hung beneath the shelf. Rosalind looked around the room. "You seem to know something about believing a silence, because it is easier than answering it." Jonah's hand stopped beneath the running water. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Harbor lifted his head. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the kitchen went dark. The generator started automatically beneath the cabin, its low vibration moving through the floorboards. A lamp came on above the sink, followed by the small emergency light near the hallway. From beneath the gray canvas at the far wall came a burst of static. Jonah turned toward it. The old radio had been left connected to a backup receiver. A woman's voice broke through the interference. "North Ridge stations. This is Ashford Emergency Management. Weather Service has moved the ice arrival forward. Estimated onset, 1,400 hours tomorrow. Possible 10-hour acceleration." Rosalind watched Jonah. The voice continued. "Repeat. The storm is moving faster than forecast. Any active Northridge operators, acknowledge." Jonah did not move. Rosalind could see his jaw tighten. "You know her," she said. "Ruth Delaney." "Does she know you're listening?" "No." The radio hissed. "Kincaid Station, if you still monitor this frequency, acknowledge." Jonah walked to the desk, but stopped before touching the cloth. 3 years earlier, Claire had sat there during storms, one hand on the radio and the other wrapped around a mug of coffee. When power failed in the northern valley, she had spoken to frightened residents until crews reached them. After her funeral, Ruth had called the cabin for weeks. Jonah had never answered. The radio crackled again, but Ruth's voice moved on to another station. Rosalind went to retrieve Thomas's route book from her bag. Its leather cover was worn smooth along the edges, and several pages had been marked with his cramped handwriting. The silver bell chimed as she opened it. Harbor rose from the hearth. He crossed the room more slowly now, his thermal coat brushing against the table leg. Rosalind turned several pages until she found Route 7. Names ran down the margin beside hand-drawn turns and mileage notes. Merritt, Cole, Danner. At the bottom of the page was one name circled twice. Arthur Vick. Harbor pressed his nose to the paper near the name. Jonah looked down. What does that mean? Arthur was Army, Vietnam. Rosalind traced Thomas's handwriting. He stopped answering unknown callers after someone tried to steal his savings. Thomas said Arthur would watch from the window, but leave the door locked. And Harbor? Harbor was different. The German shepherd touched the silver bell and looked toward the front door. Rosalind closed the route book. According to Northlight, Arthur was contacted this morning. Jonah glanced toward the dark windows. Beyond them, the mountain had disappeared beneath cloud. And according to the letter, Rosalind held the book against her chest. No one has gone to his door. The generator continued its steady hum. Jonah looked at Claire's covered radio. For 3 years, the cabin had received every warning and answered none of them. He reached toward the gray canvas, then stopped with his hand inches above it. By 7 the next morning, the gray canvas no longer covered Claire's radio. Jonah had not answered Ruth Delaney's call during the night. He had only listened while weather stations exchanged road conditions, and power crews listed the lines most likely to fail. By dawn, 3 pages of his green notebook were filled with distances, bridge weights, and travel times around northern Ashford. He told himself it was only information. Rosalind did not challenge the lie. They drove down the mountain beneath a hard white sky. The temperature had fallen overnight, sealing yesterday's snow beneath a thin crust. Harbor lay across the back seat in his thermal coat, awake but quiet. Celeste met them outside her clinic before opening hours. She checked Harbor's paws, pressed along his right hind leg, and watched him cross the room. Short distances, she said. Vehicle to building. Building to vehicle. Harbor looked toward Rosalind. Celeste held up one finger. And don't let him make the decision. Shepherds will work through pain if they believe somebody needs them. Loyalty is a virtue. It is not a medical opinion. Rosalind accepted a set of soft, protective boots for Harbor and promised to follow instructions. Jonah said nothing. Celeste looked at him. That applies to former sailors, too. The Northlight Winter Foundation occupied the second floor of a renovated brick mill near the frozen river. Its lobby had pale wood floors, glass walls, and framed photographs of volunteers carrying food boxes through Vermont snow. At the center of the reception area, a digital screen displayed a large green number. 98.7%. Complete. Beneath it, smaller letters read, Ashford Winter Contact Initiative. Rosalind stopped beneath the screen. During the drive, she had prepared herself to find disorder, unanswered phones, careless paperwork, overworked employees. She had not prepared for polished floors and cheerful graphics. The office looked successful. That was what frightened her. A receptionist recognized Rosalind before she reached the desk. Within 2 minutes, a door opened at the end of the hall. Grant Barlow came toward them with one hand extended. He was 47, lean and carefully dressed in a gray-blue suit. His light brown hair was parted neatly despite the weather, and thin metal-framed glasses rested above eyes that seemed more tired than surprised. "Rosalind," he said, We weren't expecting you." That was intentional. Grant's hand remained between them for half a second before he lowered it. His attention shifted to Jonah, then to Harbor. "We have a no-animal policy in the administrative wing." "He will remain with me," Rosalind said. Grant studied the thermal coat, the worn leather collar, and the small brass lantern tag. Something changed in his expression when he recognized Harbor. "Of course," he said, "for today." He led them into a conference room overlooking the river. A laptop had already been placed at one end of the table. Elaine Wexler appeared on the screen a few minutes later from her office in Burlington. Her steel-gray hair was cut short, and oval tortoiseshell glasses rested low on her nose. "Before anyone begins explaining anything," Elaine said, "I want it understood that no files, emails, call records, or contractor documents are to be altered or discarded." Grant sat across from Rosalind. "Nothing is being discarded." "Then preserving it should be easy." Elaine spoke without hostility. That made the warning harder to dismiss. Grant folded his hands. "I assume this is about the anonymous letter." Rosalind looked at him. "You knew about it?" "I knew you had begun asking questions." "That was not my question." Grant removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. "No, I did not know about the letter." Jonah stood near the window rather than joining them at the table. He watched trucks move slowly along the road beside the river. Grant opened a presentation on the wall screen. Charts appeared: delivery costs, response rates, county coverage, and volunteer retention. "When Thomas was alive," Grant began, "Northlight served 11 districts. Today we serve 15. Fuel costs have risen 22% in 5 years. Volunteer availability has declined. The new system reduced operating expenses by 31%. "And the people at the end of Route 7? Rosalind asked. "We contacted every registered household." "How?" "Automated call, text confirmation, local delivery record, or verified contact through a designated distribution point." "You mean the roadside collection sites?" "In some areas." Rosalind leaned forward. "If someone cannot drive to that site, what exactly have we delivered?" Grant met her eyes. "A system cannot be designed around every exception." For a moment, no one spoke. Through the glass wall, employees moved between desks, carrying tablets and coffee. On one monitor, a map of Ashford glowed almost entirely green. Rosalind looked at the screen behind Grant. Thomas never called them exceptions. Grant's jaw tightened. Thomas built a program for 3 towns and a different financial reality. He built it for people. And I am trying to keep it alive. The words came out more sharply than Grant intended. He drew a breath and lowered his voice. Donors want measurable reach. Counties want predictable cost. Insurers want procedures. If we return to unscheduled home visits for every missed call, we lose the expansion grants by spring. Elaine made a note. Rosalind did not look away from Grant. Then perhaps the grants are measuring the wrong thing. A soft knock sounded at the conference room door. A woman stepped inside carrying a thin folder and a tablet. She was small, with straight black hair tied low and rectangular glasses that made her dark eyes appear even more focused. "Sorry," she said. "Mr. Barlow, the contractor reconciliation report is ready." Grant held out his hand. The woman crossed the room, but instead of giving him the folder immediately, she glanced at Rosalind. Grant noticed. "Nadine, this is not the time." Nadine Cole's fingers tightened around the folder. Rosalind recognized the name. Several technical reports over the past year had carried Nadine's initials in the lower corner. "What did you find?" Rosalind asked. Grant answered first. "Routine timing discrepancies. They have already been reviewed." Nadine remained by the table. "How routine?" Elaine asked from the screen. Grant turned toward the laptop. Elaine, this is an internal operational matter. It became a governance matter when you classified Route 7 as fully confirmed. Nadine looked at Grant once more. Then she placed the folder in front of Rosalind. I kept the original export, she said. The room changed. Not loudly. No one raised a voice. But Grant stopped moving. Rosalind opened the folder. The first page listed automated call records from the previous 8 months. Dozens of successful contacts showed the same duration. 11 seconds. 11 seconds, Rosalind said. That is the platform threshold, Nadine explained. At 11 seconds, the system assumes a person answered and heard enough of the message to confirm receipt. Does the person have to press anything? Not under the current settings. Grant sat straighter. The threshold follows the vendor recommendation. Nadine tapped the tablet. Some of the calls reached voicemail greetings. Some disconnected after the first sentence. The system counted them as completed. She turned to another page. These addresses were marked delivered yesterday. Jonah came to the table. The list showed 6 households, with timestamps beside each one. He did not study the financial columns. He read the road names. Where did the driver start? He asked. Nadine brought up the route. South Depot. Jonah opened his green notebook. First address is 12 miles north. Second is 9 miles east from there. Third is back across the river. Grant looked at him. Who exactly are you? Somebody who knows those roads. Jonah wrote 3 figures beside the timestamps. This truck supposedly covered 27 miles, made 6 stops, and returned to the highway in 19 minutes. It may be a logging error, Grant said. Then your completion rate includes logging errors. Grant's gaze hardened. And you believe a handwritten calculation overrides an audited platform? No. Jonah closed the notebook. I believe a truck cannot cross a frozen river bridge before it reaches the bridge. Nadine's mouth tightened, almost a smile. Grant stood. This meeting is becoming unproductive. Harbour lifted his head from beside Rosalind's chair. Somewhere beyond the conference room, metal gave a faint chime. The dog turned toward the sound. A storage room door stood partly open across the hall. Inside, beneath stacked campaign signs and boxes of printer paper, hung an old canvas delivery bag. A tarnished silver bell was fixed to its strap. Harbour rose. Rosalind placed a hand on his back. Slowly. They followed him only as far as the doorway. Harbour sniffed the old bag, then stood beside a long paper roll leaning in the corner. Jonah lifted the roll and carried it to the conference table. When Rosalind spread it open, 13 hand-drawn routes crossed Ashford and the surrounding hills. At the end of each route, Thomas had drawn a small lantern. Names appeared beside houses, not account numbers. Names. Nadine touched one of the lantern symbols. These were the local check-in stations, she said. The original program required a person at each station to follow up when a resident didn't respond. What happened to them? Rosalind asked. Grant remained standing near the window. They were redundant. Nadine looked down at the map. They were discontinued 8 months ago. Because they duplicated the automated system, Grant said. We were paying for 2 processes. Rosalind traced one of Thomas's lines with her finger. A machine made a call. A truck left a box beside a road. Then we removed the person who was supposed to notice when neither one reached the house. Grant's face had grown pale. You approved the modernization plan. Yes, Rosalind said. I did. The admission silenced even him. She did not attempt to soften it. Rosalind returned to the conference room and sat before Elaine's image. I am calling an emergency meeting of the board. I want an independent audit, an immediate preservation order on all regional records, and a temporary hold on contractor data deletion. Elaine nodded. You have authority to request all 3. You do not have authority to suspend Grant or assume operational control without a board vote. I understand. The earliest formal vote will be tomorrow afternoon. Grant let out a breath. By then, the storm will already be here. As if the weather had heard him, the office lights dimmed. A moment later, the elevator doors opened, and Ruth Delaney stepped into the lobby. She wore a Navy emergency management jacket over a charcoal sweater, snow melting along the shoulders. Her red-brown hair, half silver now, had been cut short at the nape. A large digital watch covered one wrist, and a red marker was clipped to her collar. Ruth saw Jonah through the glass. "You finally took the cover off that radio," she said. "I didn't answer it. I noticed." There was history in the exchange, but Ruth had not come to discuss it. She entered the conference room and placed a weather bulletin on the table. The ice front accelerated again. "We have less than 24 hours. Rural lines could be down for 2 days, maybe longer." Grant gestured toward the wall screen. "Northlight has already confirmed nearly every registered resident." Ruth looked up at the green number. 98.7. "That is correct." Ruth turned to Nadine. "Confirmed by a person?" Nadine did not answer immediately. Ruth pulled the red marker from her collar and uncapped it. "I do not need your donor report. I need every adult living alone who has not spoken to a real human being." Grant started to object. Ruth raised one hand. "Governance can wait. Weather cannot." Nadine returned to her desk with the old map and began comparing Thomas's routes against call records, delivery times, and direct human contacts. Jonah stood beside her, checking only roads and distances. Rosalind called names from the handwritten margins. Elaine remained on the screen, documenting each decision. Grant watched the large green number without speaking. One by one, Nadine removed the automated confirmations that had no human response behind them. 7 became 12. 12 became 28. The bright percentage on the lobby screen remained unchanged. At last, Nadine stopped typing. Ruth looked at her. "How many?" Nadine turned the monitor so everyone could see. The answer was not 7. There were 43. Ruth Delaney unplugged the lobby screen before anyone could look at the green number again. The display went black. "From this point on," she said, "we work from names." She carried the old paper map into Northlight's largest meeting room and spread it across 2 tables. Nadine followed with her laptop, while Jonah brought in road maps, a county plow schedule, and the weatherproof notebook he had filled during the night. Grant remained near the doorway. "This is still a foundation office," he said. Ruth uncapped the red marker clipped to her collar. "Until the storm passes, this room is supporting an emergency operation. You can help, or you can stay out of the way." Grant looked toward Rosalind, perhaps expecting her to object. She did not. Ruth divided the map into northern, river, and southern sectors. Nadine was permitted to release only the information necessary for a welfare check: name, address, last confirmed human contact, and the type of winter support requested. Medical files remained restricted to health personnel. "No diagnoses on volunteer sheets," Ruth said. "No private notes. Teams get what they need to reach the door, and nothing more." The first calls began before 10. 26 residents might still be confirmed without sending a vehicle. Ruth assigned staff to contact neighbors, home health workers, pastors, pharmacists, and amateur radio operators. A direct conversation counted. A voicemail did not. A delivery scan did not. A green mark on a screen certainly did not. 17 addresses required a visit. 6 of those were flagged as high risk because the residents had requested heating fuel, mobility assistance, or transportation to a warming center. Jonah stood over the road map, calculating travel times in pencil. "The county plow can keep Route 8 open until mid-afternoon," he said. "After that, the river road becomes unreliable. We send the southern teams first, then move the tracked vehicles north. Ruth studied his notes. You have 3 trained volunteer drivers, 1 fire department utility truck, and 2 farm vehicles that can handle the drifts. 4 trained drivers if I go. Your logistics, I can do both. No. Jonah looked up. Ruth did not raise her voice. You have not worked under County Emergency Command in 3 years. You do not assign yourself to the most difficult route because you happen to know it. I know every washout north of the river. Then remain where every team can use what you know. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he returned to the map. Ruth moved on. No one in the room congratulated him for obeying. That seemed to make obedience harder. Nadine sat at the end of the table with a yellow mechanical pencil between her fingers. Each time a resident was reached by a real person, she crossed out the automated confirmation and entered the new time beside the name. The first successful call came from a pharmacy technician who had spoken to an elderly customer that morning. The second came through a church deacon. The third came from a neighbor who had seen porch smoke less than an hour earlier, but agreed to knock on the door and confirm in person. The list shortened slowly. Then Nadine stopped. What is it? Ruth asked. Nadine turned her laptop. June Ellis, 79, South Hollow Road. Rosalind recognized the surname. Mona's mother? Nadine nodded. Registered for twice monthly grocery delivery. The system shows 3 completed deliveries in 6 weeks. Human contact? None recorded. Ruth picked up the office phone. Mona arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing her diner uniform. She had thrown a teal winter coat over the brown-red apron, and the knot at the back of her hair had partly come loose. The scratched name tag remained pinned above her pocket. She entered the room, looking first at Rosalind, then at Ruth. Is my mother hurt? We don't know, Ruth said. Sit down. Mona did not sit. Nadine explained the records carefully. 3 grocery boxes had been marked, delivered to a collection point near the old feed store. The system had sent automated notices to June's landline. Each call lasted 11 seconds. My mother doesn't drive when there's snow, Mona said. She barely drives when there isn't. Did she tell you she was missing deliveries? Rosalind asked. Mona stared at the address on the screen. She said the foundation had changed the schedule. I thought she was confused. The words came out quietly. Mona pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed. Everyone in the room heard it ring. Once, twice, 6 times. No answer. Mona called again. Still nothing. She keeps the television loud, Mona said. Sometimes she doesn't hear the phone. Ruth wrote June's name on the high-priority board. I'll put her on the first southern route. I'm going. No, Ruth said. Not alone. She's my mother. That is why you do not go alone. Fear makes people take roads they should not take. Mona looked toward Rosalind. The white enamel bowl was not in the room, but both women seemed to remember it. I should have brought the water out, Mona said. Rosalind did not offer the easy comfort Mona appeared to want. This is not the same moment. It feels like it. No. Rosalind stepped closer. Yesterday, you had a choice in front of you. Today, you have another one. Do not waste this one by standing here punishing yourself. Mona looked down at her apron. What do I do? Tell Ruth everything that might help someone reach your mother. Mona drew a breath. Then she began. June kept a spare key beneath a ceramic rabbit on the back porch. The front steps iced quickly. She sometimes turned off her hearing aids in the afternoon because they made the television sound harsh. She would resist leaving the house if she believed someone intended to move her permanently. Ruth recorded each detail, then shared only the necessary information with the assigned medical team. Mona remained at the table after the call ended. For the first time, the 43 names stopped looking like a problem the Foundation could solve with better software. One of them had a blue chair beside a television. One of them hid a key beneath a ceramic rabbit. One of them was somebody's mother. By noon, the fire station had become the main command post. Folding tables were arranged beneath fluorescent lights. County maps covered one wall. Volunteers checked radios, while firefighters loaded blankets, fuel canisters, and emergency food into utility vehicles. At the far end of the building, someone had placed a coffee urn beside a handwritten sign. "Take one before you think you need it." The Ashford Community Church opened its kitchen to prepare meals. Celeste converted 2 unused examination rooms into temporary spaces for pets whose owners might need shelter. 2 farmers offered tracked utility vehicles and 1 old snowcat. People came because Ruth called them. Others came because Mona called them. A few came because they had heard that 43 neighbors had disappeared behind a percentage. Rosalind stood near the supply table with Elaine on speakerphone. "We should release a statement now," Rosalind said, "before Grant or the contractor controls the story." Elaine's voice remained measured. "You can confirm that records are under review. Do not publish the names, incomplete allegations, or raw data during an emergency. The public has a right to know. The residents also have a right not to become evidence in your argument." Rosalind turned away from the others. "If we stay silent, it looks like concealment. If you speak before verification, volunteers may resign, donors may freeze funds, and families may panic. Preserve the evidence. Protect the people. Explain the failure when the facts are stable." Jonah had been listening from the map table. "That sounds convenient," he said. Elaine paused. "For whom?" "For Northlight." Rosalind ended the call before Elaine could answer. She faced Jonah. "You think I'm still protecting the foundation? I think institutions always find a reason to delay telling the truth. And I think angry men often mistake immediate action for the only honest action. The firefighters nearest them found reasons to move elsewhere." Jonah lowered his voice. 43 people were counted without being reached." "I know. Do you?" Rosalind's eyes hardened. "I signed the modernization vote." The admission stopped him. She continued. "I did not merely fail to notice what Grant built. I helped remove the home visit network. I read the projected savings. I approved the language about access points. I told myself more counties served meant more good accomplished." Jonah said nothing. "Grant made the system colder," she said, "but he did not build it alone." Outside, a plow passed the station, scraping frozen snow from the road. Jonah looked toward the open bay doors. "A rescue has an end," he said. Rosalind waited. "You find the person. You get them warm. You bring everyone back." His thumb moved along the edge of his green notebook. "There is a time when somebody says the operation is complete. And afterward? That belongs to someone else." The answer sounded harsher once spoken. Rosalind studied him. Claire did not believe that. Jonah's gaze snapped back to her. "No." She kept answering the radio after the danger passed. "You did not know her." "No, but I know what kind of person leaves 2 mugs hanging beneath a shelf." Jonah looked away. Rosalind softened her voice, though not her meaning. "You can help save these people tonight and still abandon them tomorrow. And you can build a perfect committee and fail to reach them before dark." Both statements were true. That was why neither of them won. Ruth stepped between the tables holding a fresh weather update. "You 2 finished?" Neither answered. "Good. Evidence is being copied to Elaine and an independent auditor. No public accusations until the residents are secure. No one returns to a cabin and declares the work complete, while the roads are still closed." Her eyes rested on Jonah for the final sentence. Then she tapped the southern sector. "We need another warming location." The church could hold 20 adults. The fire station had room for emergency cases, but needed its bays clear. The veterinary clinic could shelter animals, not large groups of people. North Fork Diner sat near the southern routes, beside a plowed road, and across from the municipal generator connection. Ruth called Dale. He refused, so Rosalind went in person. The lunch crowd was smaller than the day before. Weather reports played above the counter. Dale stood near the register with his pencil behind one ear, acting as if he had not noticed Rosalind enter. "No," he said before she reached him. "I already told Ruth. My insurance does not cover a shelter. It would be a supervised warming point, not an overnight shelter. Same difference when somebody slips. The town will provide emergency staff. Northlight will cover food and operating costs. This place is how I make a living." Rosalind placed one page on the counter. It contained names from the southern sector, not medical details or confidential notes. Only residents Dale knew personally and the streets where they lived. He glanced down. His expression changed at the fourth name. "Mr. Hensley comes in every Tuesday," he said. "He has not been seen in 11 days. Dale read farther. "Lou Carver was here last month. Lou lives alone beyond Mill Road. I know where he lives. Did you know no one had spoken to him since Sunday?" Dale did not answer. Mona stood near the kitchen doors watching him. She had removed her apron to prepare to leave with the first volunteer team. Dale read the list again. These were not strangers asking to use his business. They were people whose eggs he knew, whose coffee he poured before they ordered, whose empty booths he had never thought to question. "How many?" he asked. 6 may need immediate warmth," Rosalind said. "Possibly more before morning." Dale looked around the diner, at the booths, at the kitchen, at the doorway, where Harbor had stood trembling the day before. "The town supervises it." "Yes." "And Northlight pays the additional cost." "Yes." He reached behind his belt and removed the ring of keys. "I'm not agreeing to turn this into a permanent shelter." "No one asked you to." Dale separated one key from the ring and placed it on the counter. "The kitchen stays open." Rosalind looked at him. This was not repentance. It did not erase the bowl beneath the counter or the cold words under the awning. It was only a door that would not be locked tonight. For now, that was enough. The first power line came down at 4:17 in the afternoon. Jonah heard it happen through 3 different radios. One caller described a blue flash over Mill Road. A fire crew reported a pine tree leaning across the northbound lane. Then Ruth Delaney's voice cut through the interference from the station. "Kincaid, activate the ridge relay." Jonah stood inside the cabin with one hand resting on the back of Claire's chair. Outside, freezing rain tapped against the windows. Ice had begun sealing the pine needles together, turning every branch into a thin piece of glass. The radio desk waited beneath the emergency lamp. Jonah removed the gray canvas cover. Dust lifted into the light. The equipment beneath it was older than much of what the county now used, but Claire had maintained it carefully. The main transceiver sat beside 2 backup receivers, a battery monitor, and a handwritten frequency list protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. Jonah opened the desk drawer. Claire's pencil was still there. So was a yellow note in her handwriting. "North Valley fades after heavy ice. Switch to relay 2 before blaming the antenna." Jonah read it once. Then he sat down. "Ridge relay is active," he said into the microphone. There was a brief silence on the channel. Ruth answered without ceremony. "Copy. Welcome back." Jonah did not respond to that part. He began receiving field reports. The first Southern team reached June Ellis's house before the road iced over completely. Mona rode in the fire department utility truck beside a home health nurse, gripping the dashboard every time the tires shifted. June's small white house stood behind a row of bare lilac bushes. No lights showed in the windows. Mona found the spare key beneath the ceramic rabbit on the back porch. "Mom?" The living room was warm but dim. June sat in a blue chair beside the television, wrapped in a plaid blanket. Her hearing aids rested in a dish on the side table. She was not alone. An 82-year-old neighbor named Betty Sloan sat on the sofa with a bowl of vegetable soup balanced in both hands. 2 grocery boxes had been opened on the kitchen counter. June had divided their contents into careful portions. Mona stared at the nearly empty shelves. "You told me deliveries were coming." June looked at her daughter's face and understood what the question really meant. "I told you not to worry." "That wasn't the truth. It was what I wanted to give you." Mona knelt beside the chair. June touched the loose strand of hair near her daughter's cheek. "I heard about the woman at the diner." Mona looked away. "Dale told you?" "Betty's nephew did." June nodded toward the kitchen. "You can keep being ashamed, or you can carry that box next door. Only one of those things feeds anybody." Mona let out a breath that shook on the way out. "I was afraid." "I know." June picked up her hearing aids. "Fear gets practiced like anything else. So does courage." The nurse checked both women while Mona began packing food for the return trip. June refused evacuation at first, believing the warming center might send her somewhere permanent. Mona did not argue. She showed June the written plan, introduced the driver, and promised they would return her home when the road reopened. June agreed to leave only after Betty agreed to go with her. At the cabin, Jonah marked both names in his notebook. "June Ellis and Betty Sloan confirmed," he reported. "Transporting south." Ruth answered, "Copy." Rosalind sat at the second receiver, reading names from the route lists and recording updates. Harbor slept on a blanket near the stove, his thermal coat folded beside him. The dog opened his eyes each time a voice came through the radio. By 6 o'clock, the ice had thickened. One volunteer vehicle slid into a snowbank near Fox Hollow. No one was hurt, but the team had to wait for a farm tractor to pull them free. A tree blocked East Chapel Road, forcing 2 welfare checks onto a longer route. At another house, an elderly man refused to open the door because he believed the rescue workers had come to move him into assisted living. Ruth sent his pastor to speak over the radio while the team waited outside. Jonah tracked fuel, road closures, and distances. He did not tell the crews to push through. That was the old instinct, to find the narrowest margin and use all of it. Ruth had ordered something different. "Team 4, Jonah said, turn back at the creek bridge. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in 20 minutes. That surface will not hold." The driver protested. "We're less than 2 miles from the address. You are also 40 minutes from support. We can make it." Jonah looked at Claire's frequency list. Years earlier, she had crossed out one line and written beside it, "Getting there is only half the trip." "Turn around," Jonah said. Ruth came onto the channel. "That is an order." The team turned back. Jonah sat in the quiet that followed, his hand still around the microphone. Rosalind watched him. "You wanted to tell them to continue." "Yes, but you didn't." "No." Harbor lifted his head from the blanket. Jonah looked toward the dog. "Doesn't feel like courage." Rosalind returned her attention to the route list. "It rarely does when it means surrendering control." He almost answered, but another call came through. At North Fork Diner, every booth had been filled. Wet coats hung over chairbacks. Boots lined the wall near the heater. Dale worked behind the counter with his sleeves rolled up and his heavy gray mustache damp from steam. He measured soup into bowls with the same care he once gave portion costs. No speeches, no apology repeated for an audience. He simply kept the kitchen open. Lou Carver sat at the counter beneath a wool blanket. He was a narrow man in his 70s, with large hands, and a face Dale had seen every Wednesday morning for nearly 9 years. Dale set coffee in front of him. "Black. 1 sugar." Lou looked at the cup. "I haven't been in here for 3 weeks." Dale stopped. "I noticed," he said. "No, you didn't." The kitchen timer rang. Neither man moved. Lou wrapped both hands around the mug. "My truck died. Then my furnace started acting up. I figured somebody would call eventually. Dale glanced toward the tables filled with people whose orders he knew by memory. He knew who wanted rye toast. He knew who complained about weak coffee. He knew who tipped in quarters. He had never asked who would notice if they stopped coming. "Soup needs more salt," Lou said. Dale nodded. "You always say that." This time, the familiarity did not comfort him. Near 8 o'clock, Ruth contacted the cabin. "Route 7 has one unresolved address." Jonah already knew the name. "Arthur Vick." "2 calls, no answer. Power is down in that sector." "I'll take Harbor." "No. Arthur may not open for anyone else. You are running the relay. Rosalind can read status reports." Rosalind looked at him sharply. Ruth's answer came through static. "You do not assign yourself." Jonah stood from the radio desk. "Then assign me." The channel remained quiet for several seconds. Ruth spoke again. "Fire Captain Eli Boone will follow in the utility truck. You drive only as far as the east logging gate. If the road worsens, you turn back. Harbor walks the final distance only if the footing is safe. Celeste approves before you leave." Jonah reached for his coat. "And Kincaid?" "Yes." "Experience does not make you expendable." He looked at Claire's chair. "Copy." Celeste checked Harbor at the fire station before allowing the trip. She fastened the green thermal coat around his chest and fitted the protective boots. 5 minutes on foot, she said. Maybe 10. If he favors that right leg, you stop. Harbor stood patiently while she worked. Celeste looked up at Jonah. "The dog does not owe anyone another rescue." "I know. Make sure you act like it." The road to Arthur Vick's house narrowed after the logging gate. Jonah's pickup crawled through ice-coated ruts, while Eli Boone followed behind in the fire utility vehicle. Branches bent low over the road. Several struck the truck roof as they passed. At the last turn, a fallen maple blocked both vehicles. Arthur's house stood less than a quarter mile beyond it. Jonah looked at Harbor. The shepherd was already awake. They continued on foot. Jonah carried a radio, emergency blanket, and small medical pack. Harbor walked beside him, slower than he once would have, but steady. The house appeared through the trees, a dark shape with one upstairs window faintly illuminated by a battery lantern. Jonah stopped at the foot of the porch. "Arthur Vick." No answer. He climbed the steps and knocked. "Mr. Vick, my name is Jonah Kincaid. Ashford Emergency Management sent us." Silence. Jonah tried again. A curtain shifted in the front window, then became still. "He's watching," Eli said from the yard. Jonah stepped away from the door. He removed the small brass lantern tag from beneath Harbor's coat so it could be seen against the dark fur. "Easy," he said. Harbor climbed the steps. The dog stood before the door and waited. Then he lifted his right paw. 2 slow taps against the wood. Harbor gave one short bark. Nothing happened. Jonah felt the wind drive cold rain against the back of his neck. Harbor tapped again. A light moved behind the curtain. The deadbolt turned, but the door opened only 2 inches. An old man looked through the gap. Arthur Vick was thin, with white hair flattened on one side and a gray thermal shirt beneath an unbuttoned flannel jacket. A hearing aid sat in his left ear. His eyes moved from Jonah to Eli, then down to Harbor. "Thomas?" Arthur asked. The question struck Rosalind's name from another time into the cold air. "No, sir," Jonah said. "Thomas died." Arthur's hand tightened around the edge of the door. "I know that." Harbor moved closer, but did not cross the threshold. Arthur stared at the dog's silver muzzle and folded left ear. "That you, soldier?" Harbor's tail moved once. The door opened wider. Arthur had shut off his lights after receiving repeated scam calls, claiming to represent the power company. He had ignored Northlight's automated message and believed the people outside might be connected to the callers. His wood stove was still burning, but his medication supply was low, and the roof over the back room had begun leaking. He refused to leave. Jonah did not threaten him or speak to him like a child. He sat on the porch step while Harbor rested between them. "We can bring fuel and medication," Jonah said. "You can stay if the house remains safe, but somebody needs to check the roof." Arthur looked toward Eli. "That one no roofs?" Eli nodded. "Better than I know people." Arthur considered that. Fair enough. The door opened fully. Near 3 a.m, Jonah returned to the cabin. Rosalind had kept the relay active. Ruth's voice moved through the radio as the final teams checked in. All 43 names had been verified. Most residents remained safely in their homes with food, heat, or direct contact established. 6 had been transported to warming locations. Several would require follow-up when roads reopened. No one had been rescued by a number. No one had been abandoned because a screen had already declared the work complete. Ruth read the final name. Arthur Vick, confirmed safe at residence. Jonah sat before Claire's radio. Harbor lowered himself beside the chair near the window, tired but comfortable. The cabin smelled of wet wool, wood smoke, and coffee. For 3 years, Jonah had kept the radio silent because every voice reminded him of the one he could no longer hear. Now the frequencies were filled with ordinary people reporting that blankets had arrived, furnaces had restarted, and doors had opened. Jonah placed Claire's pencil beside his notebook. Outside, ice covered the mountain. Inside, the cabin answered. The morning after the storm, Ashford did not wake to applause. It woke to chainsaws. Crews cleared broken limbs from roads, while utility workers moved from pole to pole through the frozen valley. At the fire station, blankets were folded, fuel requests were updated, and every resident from the 43-name list received another human check. Some returned home before noon. Others remained at the church or North Fork Diner until heat was restored. Arthur Vick stayed in his own house. Eli Boone repaired the damaged section of roof. A pharmacist delivered Arthur's medication, and Harbor slept nearly the entire following day beside Rosalind's chair. The storm had ended. The work had not. Within a week, Elaine Wexler retained an independent accounting firm with experience in nonprofit contracts. Northlight's board issued a preservation order covering emails, call logs, delivery records, contractor invoices, and every revision made to the Ashford database. Grant Barlow was placed on administrative leave pending review. He did not resist the order. He only asked that staff salaries continue to be paid. That request complicated the picture in a way Rosalind would have preferred to avoid. For 3 months, the investigation moved without drama. There were no midnight arrests, no hidden bank accounts, and no single document that explained everything. Auditors compared truck mileage with fuel receipts. Nadine provided copies of the original reports and showed where warnings had been relabeled as technical irregularities. Elaine reconstructed the board's decisions and the language used in the delivery contract. Jonah gave one formal statement. He explained that several recorded routes could not have been completed within the reported time. He marked the bridge locations, winter speed limits, and roads that became impassable after freezing rain. When the auditors asked about foundation accounting, Jonah said, "That isn't my field." Then he left the room. The final report was 214 pages long. The delivery contractor had overstated the number of successful household contacts and used a vague contract phrase, nearest accessible distribution point, to count roadside drop-offs as completed service. Northlight had paid for work that had not been performed as donors, and residents reasonably understood it. But the report did not place all responsibility outside the foundation. Grant had received repeated warnings that residents without transportation could not reach the collection sites. He had postponed changes, adjusted internal language, and continued presenting completion figures without clearly explaining how they were calculated. No evidence showed that he had stolen money. He had protected the program, the expansion grants, and his own decisions. In doing so, he had stopped protecting the people. The public meeting was held in the old Ashford Theater on a cold evening in March. The building had once shown Saturday westerns and Christmas pageants. Its red velvet seats were faded, and the gold paint around the stage had cracked with age. That night, every seat was occupied. The 43 names were not displayed. Rosalind had refused to turn private residence into a public exhibit. Instead, the old map of 13 routes stood on an easel beside the stage. A small lantern had been drawn at the end of each line. Grant arrived alone. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie. Months away from the office had changed him. His hair was still neatly parted, but there were shadows beneath his eyes, and he carried no black briefcase. A few people turned to watch him sit. No one spoke to him. Rosalind waited backstage with Jonah, Elaine, and Nadine. Harbor lay on a blanket near the curtain, wearing only his old leather collar and brass lantern tag. Celeste had refused to let him remain for the entire meeting, so Jonah had promised to take him home after the first hour. "You do not have to sit on stage," Rosalind told Jonah. "I know. You could leave after your statement." "I know that too." Rosalind studied him. Months earlier, he would have used the option. Now he stayed. The board chair opened the meeting with the audit findings. Elaine explained the legal process in plain language. The contractor would repay a negotiated portion of the fees, and state regulators would review whether additional penalties were warranted. Then Grant walked to the lectern. A murmur moved through the theater. Grant placed both hands on either side of the podium. "The report is accurate," he said. "I received warnings. I believed the problems could be corrected without dismantling a model that had allowed Northlight to expand into 4 additional regions." Someone called from the back, "You lied." Grant looked toward the voice. "I presented figures without making their limitations clear. That was wrong." The answer did not satisfy the room. Perhaps it should not have. Grant turned toward the route map. But the cost problem was real. Volunteer numbers were falling. Fuel costs were rising. Several donors had made continued expansion a condition of future support. If Northlight returned entirely to the old model, some towns would lose service altogether. Rosalind listened from her chair. Grant was not inventing those facts. That was what made the failure dangerous. The worst decisions rarely arrived wearing the face of cruelty. More often, they came dressed as necessity and asked decent people to look away from whoever would bear the cost. Grant continued. "A system cannot place unlimited resources behind every household." The room quieted. Rosalind rose. She walked to the second lectern without notes. "I agree with Mr. Barlow about one thing," she said. "Resources are limited." Several people shifted in surprise. Northlight could not visit every home every week. It could not answer every need. And the modernization plan did allow the foundation to serve more communities. She turned toward the audience. "I voted for that plan." No one in the room had accused her aloud, but Rosalind did not wait for accusation. "I read the projections. I approved the collection sites. I allowed local check-in stations to be removed because they appeared inefficient." Her fingers rested lightly against the wood. "I told myself that helping more people meant we were doing more good. But somewhere along the way, we began using the size of the crowd to excuse the people we could no longer see." She glanced at Harbor. The old shepherd's head rested between his paws. A person who cannot drive through snow is not an exception to winter relief. A man who does not answer an unfamiliar number is not a failed data point. Those are the very people the foundation was created to find. The theater remained still. Rosalind looked at Grant. "You were wrong to hide the warnings." Then she faced the crowd again. "And I was wrong before you were." The words did not repair anything. They did, however, leave no place for pride to stand. Jonah spoke next. He did not use the lectern. He carried a road map to the front of the stage and held it open. "This is Route 7, he said. "On a clear summer day, it is easy. In January, after dark, it is not." He pointed to the bridge, the logging gate, and the turn where the road narrowed. A computer can confirm that a call connected. A scanner can confirm that a box left a truck. Neither one can tell you whether Arthur Vick opened his door. Jonah lowered the map. Technology is not the enemy. Nobody in this room should have to depend on one volunteer remembering every house. But every confirmation needs a name attached to it. Somebody has to be responsible for noticing when the process stops short of a person. Ruth, seated in the front row, nodded once. The board presented its proposed reforms. Each of the 13 routes would have a physical contact point and a designated coordinator. Automated systems would remain, but unanswered calls would move to human review. Each area would maintain radio backup, an in-person escalation procedure, and a rotating team, so no resident depended entirely on a single volunteer. Older residents, veterans, medical workers, and local emergency personnel would receive voting seats on the restructured board. No founder would hold unilateral control, not even Rosalind. During the break, the board chair approached Jonah near the side aisle. "We need an executive director who understands the field," she said. "The board would consider you." Jonah looked toward the stage. Months earlier, the offer might have sounded like purpose. Now he heard the danger inside it. If every difficult road led back to one man, Northlight would not have learned anything. "No," Jonah said. The chair seemed surprised. "You haven't heard the compensation. It isn't about that. What role would you accept? Logistics advisor, route planning, training local coordinators. You could do more. I could become another person everyone waits for." Across the aisle, Ruth had heard him. She said nothing, but her expression softened. The board voted before the meeting ended. Grant's administrative leave became a formal dismissal based on his failure to disclose internal warnings and his misleading presentation of the program's results. The decision was not unanimous. Grant gathered his coat near the rear exit. Rosalind met him beneath the old theater marquee. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the edge of the roof. "They will discover what I discovered," Grant said. "Every promise costs more when it reaches the last house. Yes. And there will always be another last house. Yes." Grant looked tired rather than angry. "A system cannot survive if every case receives unlimited resources." Rosalind buttoned Thomas's old field coat. "No," she said, "but it should not survive by always cutting away the people least able to complain." Grant looked back through the theater doors. "I thought I was saving it." "I know." That was not forgiveness, but it was the truth. The following afternoon, Dale asked for 5 minutes at the diner before the new Southern route coordinators began their first training session. He stood near the same entrance, where Rosalind and Harbor had waited in the cold. Mona remained behind the counter. "I treated you badly," Dale said. "Both of you." Harbor sat beside Rosalind, his left ear tipped forward. Dale cleared his throat. "I could say I was worried about insurance, or the business. Those things were true. But I also decided what kind of person you were before I knew your name." Rosalind waited. "I'm sorry. I accept the apology," she said. Relief moved across his face too quickly. Rosalind continued. "That does not mean trust returns today." Dale's shoulders lowered. "I understand. You will understand when someone else arrives wet, tired, and inconvenient." Mona reached beneath the counter. She brought out the white enamel bowl with the blue rim. After washing it, she carried it to the entrance and filled it with warm water. Beside it, she placed 2 clean towels and a handwritten sign, "For anyone who needs it." Dale looked at the bowl. This time, he did not tell her to put it away. 1 year after the ice storm, Ashford entered winter with 13 lights burning before the first heavy snow. They were not memorials. They were not expensive buildings with polished signs and donor names cut into stone. One hung outside the fire station. Another glowed beside the church kitchen. There were lanterns at Celeste Morgan's veterinary clinic, at a repair garage near Mill Road, and on the porch of a retired nurse who kept a generator in her barn. The first lantern hung above the entrance to North Fork Diner. Its amber glass cast a warm circle across the awning, where Rosalind and Harbor had once stood in the cold. Beneath it sat the white enamel bowl with the blue rim. Dale checked the water every morning before he unlocked the front door. No one praised him for it anymore. That was how he knew the work had become real. The new network was called 13 Lanterns, though Ruth Delaney disliked the name at first. "Sounds like something people will print on coffee mugs," she said during the first planning meeting. June Ellis, seated across from her with both hearing aids turned up, replied, "Then make sure the coffee mugs have the emergency number printed on the bottom." The name stayed. Each station had a backup phone, a radio, emergency heat, and a coordinator whose name appeared beside the route. Automated calls still went out before storms, but no unanswered message could close a file. Someone had to call again, contact a neighbor, or request a visit. Nadine Cole led the new verification team. Above her desk, the green completion screen had been replaced by a plain board divided into 13 routes. Beside every confirmed household was a set of initials belonging to the person who had spoken with the resident. Grant's old percentage no longer appeared anywhere in the building, not because numbers had become shameful, because numbers had finally been taught to answer to names. Mona maintained a different list at the diner. She noted who had not come in when expected. Lou Carver missed one Wednesday breakfast and received a call before noon. Mr. Hensley failed to appear for 2 Tuesdays, and Mona learned he had gone to visit his sister in Maine. June complained that her daughter now checked on her too often, but she answered every call. "You wanted people to notice," Mona reminded her. "I wanted respect," June said. "There is a difference." June joined the Foundation's Resident Advisory Council that spring. At her first meeting, she listened to a 20-minute presentation about vulnerable populations, then raised one hand. "Stop calling us vulnerable as though it is our full-time occupation." The presenter fell silent. June continued. "Some of us need help carrying fuel. Some need help hearing the phone. That does not mean we want strangers making decisions before they ask what we can still do for ourselves." Rosalind smiled from the end of the table. "That," she said, "should be written into the policy." It was. Jonah remained what he had agreed to become, a logistics advisor, route planner, and trainer. He did not become the face of 13 Lanterns. When a regional newspaper asked to photograph the former Navy SEAL who had saved Ashford, Jonah declined the interview and sent Ruth instead. Ruth did the interview, corrected the headline, and named 14 other people before answering the first question. Jonah rebuilt the radio station at his cabin without turning it into a shrine. Claire's handwritten frequency card remained beside the equipment, protected in clear plastic. Her pencil stayed in the drawer, but the gray canvas cover was folded and stored in the woodshed. The room was used now. Volunteers trained there twice a month. Coffee rings appeared on the desk. Wet gloves dried near the stove. Once, a young electrician placed his coat over the back of Claire's chair without asking. Jonah saw it. For a moment, his body tightened. Then he returned to the route map. Grief had not disappeared. It had simply stopped deciding where everyone else was allowed to sit. Harbor retired from long winter routes. Celeste made the decision official after catching Jonah studying a northern road assignment with the shepherd standing beside him. "No," she said, "I didn't ask." "You were thinking loudly." Harbor was 10 now. More silver covered his muzzle, and the right hind leg stiffened after cold mornings. He still wore the old leather collar with the brass lantern tag, but most days he remained at Station 1 beside the diner entrance. People who distrusted offices often sat near him first. Arthur Vick came once a month for coffee and stayed only if the booth nearest Harbor was open. New volunteers learned not to reach over the dog's head. Harbor decided when to move closer. Sometimes an older visitor would sit without speaking, one hand hanging beside the chair. Harbor would cross the small distance and rest his head beneath that hand. The foundation could write policies about dignity. Harbor practiced it without paperwork. Jonah began eating Sunday dinner with Rosalind. The first few meals were held at her rented house near the town square. Rosalind cooked badly, but set the table as if expecting company from a better household. Jonah usually repaired something before leaving: a loose hinge, a porch light, a radiator valve. Rosalind accused him of using tools to avoid conversation. Jonah accused her of asking questions no guest should answer before dessert. Neither denied the charge. They did not become family in a single evening. Some Sundays ended in argument. Rosalind still made decisions before consulting people. Jonah still disappeared for several days when a conversation came too close to Claire. Rosalind once enrolled him in a regional emergency conference without asking. Jonah responded by refusing to attend and not answering her calls for a week. When he returned, she did not apologize immediately. When she finally did, Jonah did not pretend the matter had never happened. Their closeness grew through correction, not agreement. Rosalind never sat in Claire's chair. Jonah never called Thomas's root book his own. They learned that honoring the dead did not require keeping the living at a distance. 2 winters later, Rosalind's heart condition worsened. The changes were small at first. She stopped halfway up the theater stairs and pretended to examine a poster. She rested both hands on the counter after standing too long. Jonah noticed she checked her pulse more often beneath the cuff of her sweater. When he asked, she changed the subject. When Celeste asked, Rosalind told the truth. The doctors adjusted her medication, but the future had begun narrowing. Rosalind responded by calling a public board meeting. No one expected the announcement. She stood before the 13 route coordinators wearing a navy wool suit and Thomas's wedding ring on her left hand. "I am transferring my remaining voting authority into the Community Governance Trust," she said. The board chair stared at her. "You are not required to do this." "I know. You could retain your seat for life. That is precisely why I should not." The new structure distributed authority among resident representatives, veterans, medical workers, emergency personnel, and local volunteers. No founder, director, or donor could sell the network, take unilateral control, or appoint a personal successor. Rosalind signed the documents while fully competent and in full view of the community. There was no sealed envelope, no surprise inheritance, no final transfer of power disguised as love. After the meeting, Jonah found her outside beneath the theater marquee. "You could have waited," he said. "For what?" "Until you were certain." Rosalind looked at the snow beginning to fall around the street lights. "I am certain that any system built around one indispensable person has already begun to fail." Jonah knew she was no longer speaking only about Northlight. The following Sunday, Rosalind came to the cabin carrying Thomas's leather root book. They ate stew at the kitchen table. Harbor slept near the fire. Claire's 2 mugs hung beneath the shelf, but Jonah had added a third. Rosalind placed the root book beside his bowl. "No," Jonah said. "I have not asked anything." "You were going to." She smiled faintly. The exchange had become an old one between them. "I want you to keep it." "I don't want a mission." "It is not a mission." "It was Thomas's." "Yes." "And the roots belong to the foundation." "Yes." Jonah looked at the worn leather cover. What do you expect me to do with it? Remember where we made mistakes. That sounds like a mission. It sounds like memory. She pushed the book toward him. You owe me nothing, Jonah. Not leadership, not loyalty, not another year of your life. He looked at her across the table. What if I stay anyway? Rosalind's face softened. Then let it be, because you chose the people who are still here. Jonah accepted the book. Rosalind lived through one more winter. She died the following autumn in her small house near the square, after several quiet weeks of declining strength. There was no dramatic final speech. Harbor lay beside the bed. Jonah sat near the window, while evening light moved slowly across the floor. Rosalind opened her eyes once and looked toward the dog. He always knew where to wait, she whispered. Jonah did not ask whether she meant Harbor, Thomas, or both. He held her hand until her breathing stopped. The community carried the grief together. June organized the food after the funeral. Mona handled phone calls. Ruth canceled 3 unnecessary speeches. Nadine updated the governance records without changing a single route assignment. No one inherited Rosalind's authority because she had already given it away. What remained was the work. The next winter brought another major storm. By then, 13 lanterns no longer depended on the memory of what had gone wrong. New volunteers had joined. Some had never met Rosalind. Several knew the old ice storm only from training manuals. When the forecast worsened, 13 radios came alive. Calls went out. Names without responses moved to human review. Teams checked roads, fuel, and heating systems. No one asked when Jonah would arrive to take command. At the cabin, he sat before Claire's radio with Thomas's route book open beside his green notebook. Harbor slept on the blue-gray blanket near the old chair, his muzzle almost entirely silver now. Near midnight, Ruth's voice came through the speaker. Route 13 confirms the final resident. All sectors accounted for. Jonah checked the last name. Then he closed the book. After the storm eased, he drove Harbor down the mountain. The North Fork diner shone beneath its amber lantern. Outside the entrance sat the bowl of warm water, a stack of clean towels, and a wooden sign weathered by several winters. No purchase necessary. Just come inside. Jonah opened the door. Conversation paused. Then chairs moved. Not because anyone had been instructed to make room, because they had learned to notice when room was needed. Harbor entered first. Jonah followed. Outside, the 13 lanterns burned along roads, porches, and frozen fields, not to honor a hero and not to preserve the memory of failure. They burned so that no person in Ashford would disappear simply because a system had stopped looking. Sometimes the most important act of kindness is simply noticing who has gone missing from the room, the table, or the road. Ashford did not change because one hero saved everyone. It changed because ordinary people chose to answer, to open a door, and to make room before it was too late. Perhaps God's quiet work in our lives begins the same way, not always through a miracle we can see, but through a name we remember and a need we refuse to ignore. Who in your life may need to know they have not been forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May God give you the wisdom to notice, the courage to act, and the peace of knowing that even a small light can guide someone home.